managed to the strain as if she were picking up a boulder. Creating fantastical flowers or shapes by thinking of them was much more fun. The effort involved seemed related to both how large the thing was and whether it might really exist. Trees covered with wildly shaped blossoms in red and gold and purple were harder to make than a stand mirror to examine what you had done to your dress or what the other woman had done to it. A gleaming crystal palace rising out of the ground was harder still, and even if it felt solid to the touch, it changed whenever the image in your mind wavered and vanished as soon as the image did. They quietly decided to leave animals alone after a peculiar thing, much like a horse with a horn on its nose, chased them both up a hill before they could make it vanish. That very nearly sparked a new argument, with each of them claiming the other had made it. But by that time, Elaine had recovered enough of her old self to start giggling over her disgusted look, racing up the hill with their skirts hauled up, shouting at the thing to go away. Even Elaine's stubborn refusal to admit it had been her fault could not stop Nynaeve's giggles from bubbling up, too. Elaine alternated between the iron disc and the apparently amber plaque with its carving of a sleeping woman, but she did not really like using either ter'angreal. As hard as she worked with them, she did not feel as fully in Tel'aran'rhiod as with the ring, and each did have to be worked. It was not possible to tie the flow of spirit, or you bounced right back out of the world of dreams immediately. Channeling anything else at the same time seemed all but impossible, yet Elaine could not understand why. She seemed more interested in how they had been made, and not at all pleased that they did not yield their secrets as easily as the Aidam. Not knowing the why was a burr in her stocking. Once Nynaeve tried one of the pair, coincidentally on the night they were to meet Egwene, the night after leaving Boanda. She would not have been angry enough if not for the thing that rubbed her wrong so often: men. Neraz began it, stumping around the deck as the sun began to sink, muttering to himself about having his cargo stolen. She ignored him, of course. Then Tom, making up his bed at the foot of the aftermast.
Hey, Fire, how you doing, bro?
He has a point. It was plain he did not see her in the fading
Hope you're
moonlight,
doing well.
and neither did Juilin, squatting beside him. He's a smuggler, but he did pay for those goods. Nynaeve had no right to seize them. A woman's flaming rights are whatever she flaming says they are. Uno laughed. That's what women in Shinar say.
Oh, yeah.
That was when they saw her and fell silent, as usual, finding wisdom too late. Uno rubbed at his cheek, the one without a scar.
I don't have no actual smoke, so I'll do a dab with you.
He knew now what had been done.
Yeah, shit. Happy birthday, Fire.
It was hard to tell.
I hope you have a good birthday.
Shadows, but the other two seemed to have no expression at all. She did nothing to them, of course, only stalked away with a firm grip on her braid. She even managed to stalk down the ladder. Elaine already had the iron disc in her hand. The dark wooden box sat open on the table. Nynaeve picked up the yellowish plaque carved inside with a sleeping woman. It felt black and soft, not at all something that would scratch metal. With an edge of anger smoldering inside her, Saidar was a warm glow just out of sight over her shoulder.
Ain't no problem, Fire.
Maybe I can come up with some idea why this thing won't let you channel anything but goodness. Which was how she found herself in the heart of the stone, channeling a flow of spirit into the plaque, which in Tel'aran'rhiod was tucked into her belt pouch. As she often did in the world of dreams, Elaine wore a gown suitable for her mother's court.
Hell yeah, Fire. That'd be the thing to do.
With a necklace and bracelets of gold links and moonstone. But Nynaeve was surprised to discover that she herself had on something very different, though her hair was black, and its own color, around her shoulders. Her gown was haired blue and silver, and if not so low as Nora's dresses, still lower than she had chosen. She liked the way the single fire drop on her silver chain looked gleaming between her breasts. Egwene would not find it easy to bully a woman dressed so. Certainly not that that could have had anything to do with why she had donned it, even unconsciously.
Hell yeah, hopefully you have a
right away, she saw
good luck in the casino, Fire.
just fine. To herself, she appeared no different than the other woman, the twisted stone ring somehow threaded onto her necklace. Elaine, however, said she looked misty. Misty was how Saidar felt too, except for the flow of spirit she began to weave while awake. The rest was thin, and even the never-seen warmth of the true source seemed muted. Her anger remained just strong enough for her to channel. If irritation at the men faded before the puzzle, that puzzle was its own irritant. Steeling herself to confront Egwene had no compromise. She was not steeling herself at all, and there was no reason for the faint taste of boiled catfern and powdered maven's leaf on her tongue. Producing a single flame, dancing in midair, one of the first things a novice was taught, seemed as difficult as throwing Lan over her shoulder. The flame looked attenuated even to her, and as soon as she tied the weave, it began to fade away. In seconds, it was gone. "Both of you," Amis said. She and Egwene were just there on the other side of Kalandor, both in Aiel skirts and blouses and shawls. At least Egwene had not donned so many necklaces and bracelets. "What's here so strange, Nynaeve? Have you learned to come waking?" Nynaeve gave a little jump. She did so hate people sneaking up on her. "Egwene, how did you..." she began, smoothing her skirts, at the same time that Elaine said, "Egwene,
Right, for
can't
now you can
understand
smoke."
how you..." Egwene broke in. "Rand and the Aiel had won a great victory at Cairhien. Out it all came in a torrent, everything she had told them in their dreams, from Samael to the Shangshan spearhead. Each word almost tripped over the next, and she drove everyone home with an intense stare." Nynaeve exchanged confused glances with Elaine. Surely she had been. They could not have imagined it, not with every word confirmed now. Even Amis, long white hair only emphasizing the not-quite Aes Sedai agelessness of her face, looked amazed at the flood. "Mat killed Couladin?" Nynaeve exclaimed at one point. That had certainly not been in their dreams of her. It did not sound like Mat at all. Leading soldiers? Mat? When Egwene finally trailed off, shifting her shawl and breathing a little quickly, she had barely paused for breath along the way, Elaine said weakly, "Is he well?" She sounded as if she was almost beginning to doubt her own memories. "As well as can be expected," Amis said. "He drives himself hard and listens to no one, except Moiraine." Amis was not pleased. "Avienda is with him almost all the time," Egwene said. "She is taking good care of him for you." Nynaeve doubted that. She did not know much about Aiel, and she suspected that if Anis said hard, anyone else would say murderously. Apparently Elaine agreed. "Then why is she letting him push himself? What is he doing?" Quite a bit, it turned out, and clearly too much. 2 hours each day practicing the sword with Lan or anyone else he could find. That made Amis's mouth tighten sourly. 2 more studying the Aiel way of fighting without weapons. Egwene might find that strange, but Nynaeve was all too aware of how helpless you could be when you could not channel. Still, Rand certainly should never find himself in that position. He had become a king, or something more, surrounded by Far Dar Ismai guards, ordering lords and ladies about. In fact, he spent so much time ordering them and chasing after them to make sure they did what he said, that he would not spare time for meals, if the maidens did not bring him food wherever he was. For some reason, while that seemed to irk Egwene almost as much as it did Elaine, Amis looked distinctly amused, though her face went back to Aiel's stoniness once she saw Nynaeve notice. Yet another hour each day was given to a strange school he had founded, inviting not only scholars but craftsmen, from some fellow who made looking glasses to a woman who had constructed some sort of huge crossbow with pulleys that could hurl a spear a mile. He had told no one his purpose there, except maybe Moiraine, but the only answer the Aes Sedai had given Egwene was that the urge to leave something behind was strong in everyone. Moiraine did not seem to care what Rand did. "What remains of the Shaido are retreating north," Amis said grimly. and more slip across the dragon wall to them every day. But Rand al'Thor seems to have forgotten them. He is sending the spears south toward Tyr. Half are gone already. Ruark says he has not even told the chiefs why,
Right.
and I do not think Ruark would lie to me. Moiraine stands closer to Rand al'Thor than any except Aviendha,
That'd definitely be
yet she refuses to ask him. Shaking
lot
her
of practice.
head, she muttered, though in her defense I will say that even Aviendha has learned nothing. The best way to keep a secret is to tell no one, Elaine told her, which earned her a hard stare. Amis was not far behind Bear when it came to stares that made you shift your feet. We aren't going to reason it out here, Nynaeve said, fixing her gaze on Egwene. The other woman seemed uneasy. If there was any time to begin redressing the balance between them, it might as well be now. What I want to know— You are quite right, Egwene cut in. We are not in Shiriam City, where we can lounge about and chatter. What have you to tell us? Are you still with Master Luca's menagerie? Nynaeve's breath caught, questions flying right out of her head. There was so much to tell, and so much not to. She claimed she had followed Lanfear to the meeting between the Forsaken, and spoke only of seeing Moghedien spying. Not that she wanted to avoid telling how she had been handled by Moghedien. Not really. Not exactly. But Brigitte had not released them from their promise of secrecy. Of course, that meant not telling about Brigitte at all, that she was with them. It was awkward, knowing that Egwene knew Brigitte was helping them, and still having to keep pretending that Egwene knew nothing at all. But Nynaeve managed, despite stammering, when Egwene arched her eyebrows. The light be thanked, Elaine helped her present Samara as Galad and Massima's fault. Which it was, in truth. If either had simply sent to tell her about the ship, none of the rest would have followed. When she finished, with Salidar, Amis said quietly, You are certain they will support the Karakan? They must know the prophecies of the dragon as well as Elida, Elaine said. The best way to oppose her is to attach themselves to Rand, and make it clear to the world that they intend to support him all the way to Tarman Garden. Not the slightest quaver in her voice betrayed that she was
Hey,
not
Forster,
speaking
how you
about
doing,
some
brother?
stranger. Otherwise, they are just rebels with no claim to legitimacy. They need him at least as much as he needs them. Amis nodded, but not as if she was ready to agree yet. I think I remember Massima, Egwene said. Hollow eyes and a sour mouth? Nynaeve nodded. I can hardly imagine him as any sort of prophet, but I can see him starting a riot or a war. I'm sure Galad only did what he thought was best. Egwene's cheeks colored slightly. Even the memory of Galad's face could do that. Rand will want to know about Massima and Salidar, if I can make him still long enough to listen. I want to know how it happens that you are both here, Amis said. She listened to their explanation and turned the plaque over in her hand once Nynaeve fished it out. Having the ter'angreal touched by someone else while she was using it made Nynaeve's skin crawl.
No, that's
I
such
believe
Enforcer.
you are less here than Elaine, the wise one said finally. When a dream walker enters the world of dreams,
Let me hope she gets better,
only
brother.
a tiny bit of her remains with her body, just enough to keep her body alive. If she puts herself into a shallow zone where she can be here and also speak to those around her in the waking world, she looks as you do to one who is here for them. I do not know that I like it. Any woman who can channel being able to enter till I run me own, even in this state. She returned the ter'angreal to Nynaeve. Heaving a sigh of relief, Nynaeve hastily tucked the plaque away again. Her stomach was still fluttering. If you have told everyone, Amis paused while Nynaeve and Elaine hurriedly said that they had. The woman's blue eyes were incredibly penetrating. Then we must go. I will admit there is more to be gained from these meetings than I suppose, but I have not seen that tonight. She glanced at the and vanished as one. Nynaeve and Elaine did not hesitate. Around them, the great red stone columns changed in a blink to a small, dark-paneled room, its furnishings few, plain and sturdy. Nynaeve's anger had been her hold on Salidar. Alice's study firmed both. Stubbornly defiant indeed. She hoped that Shiriam was in Salidar. It would be a pleasure to face her on an equal footing. Still, she could have wished to be somewhere else. Elaine was peering its flaking gilt frame, nonchalantly adjusting her hair with her hands. Only she had no need to use her hands here. She did not like being in this room either. Why had Egwene suggested meeting here? Elida's study might not be the most comfortable place to be, but it was better than this. A moment later, Egwene was there, on the other side of the broad table, eyes icy and hands as if she was the room's rightful occupant. Before Nynaeve could open her mouth, Egwene said, "Have you two brainless flap tongues? If I ask you to keep something to yourselves, do you immediately tell the first person you meet? Did it never occur to you that you don't have to tell everyone everything? I thought you two were good at keeping secrets." Nynaeve's cheeks grew warmer. At least she could not possibly be as scarlet as Elaine. Egwene was not quite finished. "As for how I did it, I can't teach you. You have to be a dream walker. If you can touch somebody's dreams with the ring, I don't know how. And I doubt you can with that other thing. Try to keep your mind on what you're doing. Salidar may be nothing like you expect. Now, I also have things to do tonight. At least try to keep your wits about you." And she was gone so suddenly, the last word almost seemed to come from empty air. Embarrassment ate at Nynaeve's anger. She had nearly burst out with it after Egwene asked her not to.
Oh, damn, that sucks, Enforcer.
How could you keep a secret when the other woman knew? Embarrassment won, and Saidar slipped away like sand through her fingers. Nynaeve wakened, yellow Terangrial firmly clutched in one hand. The gimbal-mounted lamp was turned down to a dim light. Elaine lay crowded in next to her, still asleep, the ring on its thong and slid down into the hollow of her throat. Muttering to herself, Nynaeve clambered over the other woman to put away the plaque, then poured a little water into the wash basin to bathe her face and neck. The water was lukewarm, but it felt cool. In the shadowy light, she thought the mirror said she was still blushing. So much for redressing the balance. If only they had met. If only she had not flapped her tongue like a brainless girl. It would have gone better if she had been using the ring, instead of being a wraith as far as the other woman was concerned. It was all Tom and Julian's fault, and Uno's. If they had not made her angry... No, it was Near's fault. She took the pitcher in both hands and washed her mouth. It was only the taste of sleep she was trying to get rid of. Nothing like boiled catfern and powdered maven's leaf. When she turned from the washstand, Elaine was just sitting up, untying the leather cord that held the ring. "I saw you losing Saidar, so I went by Elida's study, but I didn't think I should stay long in case you were. I didn't learn anything, except that Shamiran is to be arrested and reduced to accessory." She got up and tucked the ring into the box. "They can do that? Demote an Aes Sedai? I don't know. I think Elida is doing anything she wants. Egwene shouldn't wear those Aiel clothes. They're not very becoming."
I said, hell yeah, Enforcer. You have a good night.
And the breath she had been holding. Obviously, Elaine wanted to.
I hope your mom does better, brother.
Nynaeve was willing to let her. No, they certainly aren't. Climbing onto the bed, she scrunched over against the wall. They took turns sleeping on the outside. I did not even have a chance to send a message to Rand. Elaine got in after, and the lamp winked out. The small windows let in only dripples of moonlight. "And one to Avienda. If she is taking care of him for me, then she ought to take care of him." "He isn't a horse, Elaine. You don't own him." "I never said I did." "I feel if Rand takes up with Avienda woman. Don't go to sleep." Burrowed fiercely into her small pillow. Perhaps she should have sent word to Lan. All those noble women, Tyran as well as Cairhienin, feeding a man honey instead of telling him the truth. He had better not forget who he belonged to now. Below Boanda, woods closed in tightly on both sides of the river, unbroken tangles of trees and vines. Villages and farms vanished. The Eldar might as well have run through wilderness 1,000 miles from human habitation. 5 days of Sonora, Early afternoon found River Serpent anchored in the middle of a bend in the river, while the ship's one boat ferried the remaining passengers to a beach of cracked dry mud, bordered by low forested hills. Even the tall willows and
she need to get to right address.
Leaves. There was no need to give the man that necklace, Nynaeve said on the shore, watching the rowboat approach, crowded with 4 oarsmen, Juilin, and the last 5
Definitely sucks how the mail is nowadays.
She had not been gullible. Neras had showed her his map of this stretch of the river, pointing out the mark for Salidar 2 miles from the water, but nothing else indicated there had ever been a village anywhere near here. The forest wall was quite unbroken. What I paid him was quite enough. Not to cover his cargo, Elaine replied. Just because he's a smuggler doesn't mean we have a right to take it from him. Nynaeve wondered whether she'd been talking to Juilin. Probably not. It was just the law again. Besides, yellow opals are gaudy, especially in that setting. Anyway, it was worth it just to see his face. Elaine giggled abruptly. He looked at me this time. Nynaeve tried not to, but she could not help giggling too. Tom was up near the trees trying to amuse Marigan's 2 boys by juggling colored balls produced from his sleeve. Jarl and Sieve stared at him silently, hardly blinking, and held on to each other. Nynaeve had not really been surprised when Marigan and Nicola asked to accompany her. Nicola might be watching Tom and laughing delightedly now, but she would have spent every moment at Nynaeve's side had the latter allowed it. Arena wanting to come had been something of a shock, though. She was sitting off by herself on a fallen log watching Brigitte, who was stringing her bow. All 3 women might be in for a shock when they discovered what was in Salidar. At least Nicola would find her sanctuary, and Marigan might even have a chance to dispense herbs, if there were not too many yellows about. Nynaeve, have you thought about how we're going to be received? Nynaeve looked at Elaine in astonishment. They had crossed half the world, or near enough, and defeated the Black Ajah twice. Well, they'd had help in Tyr, but Tanchico had been all their doing. They brought news of Elida and the tower she was willing to bet no one in Salidar had. And most importantly, they could help these sisters make contact with Rand. Elaine, I won't say they will greet us as heroes, but it wouldn't surprise me if they kissed us before today is done. Rand alone would be worth that. 2 of the barefoot sailors leaped out to hold the rowboat against the current, and Juilin and the Shienaran splashed ashore as the sailors scrambled back aboard. On River Serpent, men were already hauling in the anchor. Clear as a path, Uno, Nynaeve said. I mean to be there before dark. From the look of the forest, all vines and dusty undergrowth, 2 miles might take that long, if Neras had not managed to gull her. That worried her more than anything else. Chapter 50. To teach and learn. Some 4 hours later, the sweat running down Nynaeve's face had very little to do with unseasonable heat, and she was wondering whether it might...
Oh, damn, that sucks. That's always sucks when they do shit like that.
Or refused to carry them beyond Boan. Late afternoon sunlight slanted sharply through windows with mostly cracked panes. Clutching her skirts in blended irritation and unease, she tried to avoid looking at the 6-eyed Sedai grouped around one of the sturdy tables near the wall. Their mouths moved silently as they conferred behind a screen of saidar. Elaine had her chin high, her hands folded calmly at her waist, but a tightness about her eyes and the corners of her mouth spoiled her regal air. Nynaeve was not sure she wanted to know what the Aes Sedai were saying. One stunning blow after another had knocked all her high expectations into a daze. One more shock and she thought she might scream, and she did not know whether from fury or pure hysteria. Very nearly everything except their clothes was laid out on that table, from Brigitte's silver arrow in front of stout Morgrin, to the 3 Terangrial before Shiriam, to the gilded coffers in front of dark-eyed Mirel. Not one of the women looked pleased. Carlinia's face might have been carved from snow. Even motherly Anaya wore a stern mask, and Beonin's look of constant wide-eyed startlement had a distinctly annoyed cast. Annoyed, and something more. Sometimes Beonin made as if to touch the white cloth spread neatly over the Quendiar seal, but her hand always stopped and retreated. Nynaeve's eyes jerked away from the cloth. She knew exactly when things had begun to go wrong. The warders who surrounded them in the woods had been proper, if cool, once she made Uno and the Shinarans put up their swords anyway. Min's warm greetings had been all laughter and hugs. But the Aes Sedai and others in the streets, caught up in their own errands, had scurried along with hardly a glance for the party being escorted in. Salidar was quite crowded, with armed men drilling in nearly every open space. The first person aside from the warders and Min to pay any attention to them at all had been the lean brown sister they were taken to, in what had once been the common room of this inn. She and Elaine had told the story they had agreed on to Phaedron Sedai, or tried to. 5 minutes into it, they were left standing, with strict orders not to move a foot or speak a word, even to each other. 10 more minutes staring at one another in confusion, while all around them accepted and white-clad novices, warders and servants and soldiers bustled between tables where Aes Sedai pored over papers and briskly handed out orders. And then they had been hustled before Shiriam and the others so quickly, Nynaeve did not think her shoes had touched the floor twice. That was when the grilling had begun, more suitable for captured prisoners than returning heroes. Nynaeve dabbed at the perspiration on her face, but as soon as she tucked the handkerchief back up her sleeve, her hands returned to their grip on her skirts. She and Elaine were not alone, standing on the colorful silk carpet. Swan, in a plain dress of fine blue wool, might have been there by choice, if Nynaeve had not known better, her face cool, utterly composed. She seemed lost in untroubled thought. Lyanna at least watched the Aes Sedai, yet she appeared equally confident. In fact, somehow more self-confident than Nynaeve remembered. The copper-skinned woman looked even more willowy too, more supple in some fashion. Perhaps it was her scandalous dress. That pale green silk was every bit as high-necked as Swan's, but it clung to every curve of her, and the material only managed to be opaque by a thin hair. It was their faces that truly stunned Nynaeve, though. She had never expected to find either alive, and certainly never looking so very young. No more than a few years older than she, if that. They did not so much as glance at one another. In truth, she thought she detected a distinct chill between them. There was another difference about them, one that Nynaeve was just beginning to recognize. If everyone, including Min, had been ginger about it, no one made any real secret of the fact that they had been stilled. Nynaeve could feel that lack. Perhaps it was being in a room where all the other women could channel, or perhaps it was knowing they had been stilled. But for the first time she was truly conscious of the ability in Elaine and the others, and its absence from Swan and Lyanna. Something had been taken from them, cut away. It was like a wound, perhaps the worst wound a woman could suffer. Curiosity overcame her. What sort of wound would it be? What had been cut away? She might as well make use of the waiting and the irritation that larded itself through her nervousness. She reached out to Saidar. "Did anyone grant you permission to channel here accepted?" Shiriam asked, and Nynaeve gave a start, hurriedly releasing the true source. The green-eyed Aes Sedai led the others back to their mismatched chairs, arranged on the carpet in a semicircle that had the 4 standing women as its focus. Some of them carried things from the table. They sat staring at Nynaeve, earlier emotions swallowed in Aes Sedai calm. None of those ageless faces acknowledged the heat by so much as a single bead of moisture. Finally, Anaya said in a gently chiding voice, "You have been very long from us, child. Whatever you have learned in the interval, you have apparently forgotten much." Blushing, Nynaeve curtsied. "Forgive me, Aes Sedai. I did not mean to overstep." She hoped they thought it was shame that heated her cheeks. She had been away from them a long time. Just 1 day ago she had given orders and people jumped when she spoke. Now she was the one expected to jump. It galled. You tell an interesting story. Carlinia obviously believed little of it. The White Sister turned Brigitta's silver arrow over in long, slender hands. And you acquired some strange possessions. The Panart Amethera gave us many gifts, Aes Sedai, Elaine said. She seemed to think we saved her throne. Even delivered in a perfectly level voice, that speech was a walk on thin ice. Nynaeve was not the only one irritated by their fall from freedom. Carlinia's smooth face turned. You come with disturbing news, Shiriam said. And some disturbing things. Her slightly tilted eyes wandered to the table, to the silvery Idam, and returned firmly to Elaine and Nynaeve. Since learning what it was for, most of the eyes had treated it like a live red adder. Most had. If the thing does what these children claim, Morvrin said absently, we need to study it. And if Elaine really believes she can make a ter'angreal, the Brown Sister shook her head. Her real attention was on the flattened stone ring, all flecked and striped in red and blue and brown, held in one hand. The other two ter'angreal lay on her broad lap. You say that this came from Varen Sedai? How is it this was never mentioned to us before? That was not directed at Nynaeve or Elaine, but at Swan. Swan frowned, but not the fierce frown Nynaeve remembered. It held the touch of diffidence, as if she knew she was speaking to her superiors, and so did her voice. That was another change Nynaeve could hardly believe. Varen never told me of it. I would very much like to ask her a few questions. And I have questions about this. Mirel's olive face darkened as she unfolded a familiar paper. Why had they ever kept that? And read aloud. What the bearer does is done at my order by my authority. Obey and keep silent at my command. Swan Sergeant, Watcher of the Seals, Flame of Tarvalin, and Unknown Seat. She pointed the paper in the seal in her fist. Hardly something to be handed out to accept it. At the time, I did not know who I could trust, Swan said smoothly. The Six Eyes Sedai stared at her. It was within my authority then. The Six Eyes Sedai did not blink. Her voice took on a thread of exasperated pleading. You cannot call me to account for doing what I had to do when I had a perfect right to do it. When the boat's sinking, you plug the hole with what you can find. And why did you not tell us? Shiriam asked quietly, but with a hint of steel. As mistress of novices, she had never raised her voice, though sometimes you wished she would. 3 accepted, sent out of the tower, chasing 13 sisters of the Black God. Do you use babies to plug the hole in your boat, Swan? We are hardly babies, Nynaeve told her heatedly. Several of those 13 are dead, and we thwarted their plans twice. In Tyr, we... Carlinia cut her off like an icy knife. You have told us all about Tyr, child, and Tanchico, and defeating Mogadin. Her mouth twisted wryly. She had already said that Nynaeve had been a fool to come within a mile of one of the Forsaken, that she was lucky to have escaped with her life. That Carlinia did not know how right she was, they certainly had not told everything, only made Nynaeve's stomach clench tighter. You are children, and lucky if we decide not to spank you. Now hold your peace until you are called on to speak. Nynaeve flushed heavily, hoping they took it for embarrassment, and held her peace. Shiriam had never taken her eyes from Swan. Well, why have you never mentioned sending 3 children out to hunt lions? Swan drew a deep breath, but folded her hands and ducked her head penitently. There seemed no point, Aes Sedai, with so much else of importance. I have held nothing back when there was the faintest reason for telling. Every scrap I knew of the Black Ajah I told. I've not known where these 2 were or what they were up to for some time. The important thing is that they are here now, and with those 3 ter'angreal. You must realize what it means to have access to Elida's study, to her papers, if only in bits. You'd never have known that she knows where you are until it was too late, except for that. We realize that, Anaya said, eyeing Morvrin, who was still frowning at the ring. It is just that perhaps the means of it takes us a little by surprise.
Right.
Mirel breathed. Why, it has become no more than a matter for scholarly discussion in the tower, almost a legend. And Aiel dreamwalkers. Who would have imagined that Aiel wise ones could channel, much less this? Nynaeve wished they had been able to keep that secret, like Birgitta's true identity and a few other things they had managed to hold back. But it was difficult to keep things from slipping out when you were being questioned by women who could bore holes in stone with a look when they wanted. Well, she supposed she should be glad they had managed to hang on to what they had. Once Tel'aran'rhiod Riot had been mentioned, and that they had entered it, a mouse would have treed cats before these women stopped asking questions. Lyanna took a half-step forward, not looking at Siuan. The important thing is that with these ter'angreal you can talk to Egwene, and through her to Moiraine. Between them you can not only keep an eye on Rand al'Thor, you should be able to influence him even in Cairhien. Where he went from the Aiel Waste, Siuan said, where I predicted he would be. If her eyes and words were directed at the Aes Sedai, her astringent tone was plainly meant for Lyanna, who grunted. Much good that did. 2 Aes Sedai sent off to the waste chasing ducks. Ooh, yes. There was very definitely a chill there. Enough, children, Anaya said, very much as if they really were children, and she, a mother, used to their petty squabbles. She eyed the other Aes Sedai meaningfully. It will be a very good thing to be able to talk with Egwene. If these work as claimed, Morvrin said, the ring on one palm and fingering the other ter'angreal on her lap. The woman would not believe the sky was blue without proof. Shiriam nodded. Yes, that will be your first duty, Elayne, Nynaeve. You will have a chance to teach Aes Sedai, showing us how to use them. Nynaeve curtsied, baring her teeth. They could take it for a smile if they chose. Teach them? Yes, and never get near the ring or the others again after. Elaine's curtsy was even stiffer, her face a cool mask. Her eyes rolled toward that fool Idam almost longingly. The letters of rights will be useful, Carlinia said. With all that white Aja coolness and logic, testiness still showed in the way she clipped her words. Gareth Bryn always wants more gold than we have, but with those we may almost be able to satisfy him. Yes, Shiriam said, and we must take most of the coin, too. There are more mouths to feed and more backs to clothe every day, here and elsewhere. Elayne gave a gracious nod, just as if they would not take the money, whatever she said, but Nynaeve simply waited. Gold and letters of rights and even ter'angreal were only a part. For the rest, Shiriam went on, we are agreed that you left the tower by command, however erroneous it was, and you cannot be held to account for it. Now that you are safely back with us, you will resume your studies. Nynaeve only breathed out slowly. It was no more than she had expected since the questioning began. Not that she liked it, but for once no one was going to be able to accuse her of having a temper. Not when in all probability it would do no good. Elayne, though, burst out with a sharp, but just that before Shiriam cut in just as sharply. You will resume your studies. You are both very strong, but you are not Aes Sedai yet. Those green eyes held them until she was sure they had taken it, and then she spoke again, her voice milder. Milder, but still firm. You are returned to us, and if Salidar is not the White Tower, you may still consider it so. From what you have told us in the last hour, there is considerably more you have yet to tell. Nynaeve's breath caught, but Shiriam's eyes slid back to the Idam. A pity you did not bring the Shanshan woman with you. That you really should have done. For some reason, Elaine blushed bright red and looked angry at the same time. For herself, Nynaeve was only relieved it was the Seanchan the woman meant. But accepted cannot be called to account for not thinking as Aes Sedai, Shiriam went on. Swan and Lyanna will have many questions for you. You will cooperate with them and answer to the best of your abilities. I trust I do not have to remind you not to take advantage of their present condition. Some accepted and even some novices have thought to lay blame for events and even take punishments into their own hands. That mild tone became cold steel. Those young women are now extremely sorry for themselves. Need I say more? Nynaeve was no more hasty than Elaine to let her know she did not, which was to say they both almost stammered in their haste to get it out. Nynaeve had not thought of assigning blame. To her thinking, Aes Sedai were all to blame, but she did not want Shiriam angry with her. Realizing that fact drove the truth home bitterly. The days of freedom certainly were gone. Good. Now you may take the jewels the Panarch gave you and the arrow. When there is time, you must tell me why she made you a gift like that, and go. One of the other accepted will find you places to sleep. Proper dresses may be hard to come by, but they will be found. I expect you to put your adventures behind you and fit smoothly back into your proper place. Plain although unspoken was the promise that if they did not fit back in smoothly, they would be smoothed until they did. Shiriam gave a satisfied nod when she saw they understood. Beonin had not said a word since the shield of Saidar was lowered, but as Nynaeve and Elaine made their curtsies, the Grey Sister rose and strode to the table where their things were laid out. "And what of this?" she demanded in heavy Tarraboner accents, whipping aside the white cloth that covered the seal on the Dark One's prison. For a change, her large blue-gray eyes looked more angry than startled. "Are there to be no more questions about this? Do you all mean to ignore it?" The black and white disc lay there next to the wash-leather purse, in a dozen or more pieces, fitted back together as neatly as they could be. It was whole when we put it in the purse. Nynaeve paused to work moisture back into her mouth. As much as her eyes had avoided the covering cloth before, they could not leave the seal now. Lyanna had smirked when she saw the red dress unwrapped from around its cargo, and said, no, she would not run away from it, even in her head. Why should we have thought to take special care? It's Cuendillar. We didn't look at it, Elaine said breathlessly, or touch it more than we had to. It felt filthy, evil. It no longer did. Carlinia had made them each hold a piece, demanding to know what evil feeling they were talking about. They had said the same things before more than once, and no one paid them any heed now. Shiriam rose and went to stand beside the honey-haired Grey. We are ignoring nothing, Beonin. Asking these girls more questions will do no good. They have told us what they know. More questions are always good, Morvrin said, but she had stopped fiddling with the ter'angreal to stare at the broken seal as hard as anyone else. It might be Cuendillar. She and Beonin had each tested it and said it was, yet she had broken one part with her hands. How many of the seven still hold? Mirelle asked softly, as if speaking to herself. How long until the Dark One breaks free and the last battle comes? Every Aes Sedai did some of almost everything, according to her talents and inclinations. Yet each Ajah had its own reason for being. Greens, who called themselves the Battle Ajah, held themselves ready to face new Dreadlords in the last battle. There was almost a hint of eagerness in Mirelle's voice. 3, Anaya said unsteadily. 3 still hold. If we know everything, let us pray that we do. Let us pray 3 are enough. Let us pray those 3 are stronger than us, Morvrin muttered. Cuendillar cannot be broken so, not and be Cuendillar. It cannot. We will discuss this in due course, Shiriam said, after more immediate matters that we can do something about. Taking the cloth from Beowulf, she covered the broken seal once more. Swan, Lyanna, we have reached a decision concerning... She stopped short as she turned and saw Elaine and Nynaeve. Were you not told to go? For all her outward calm, the turmoil inside showed in her forgetting their presence. Nynaeve was more than ready to drop another curtsy, blurt a hurried "By your leave, Aes Sedai," and scurry for the door. Without moving a muscle, the Aes Sedai and Swan and Lyanna watched her and Elaine go. Nynaeve felt their eyes like a shot. Elaine moved not a whit more slowly. Another look at the window. Once Nynaeve had the door closed and could lean back against its unpainted wood, clutching the gilded coffer to her breasts, she took her first comfortable breath, or so it seemed, since entering the old stone inn. She did not want to think about the broken seal. Another broken seal. She would not. Those women could shear sheep with their eyes. She could almost look forward to watching their first meeting with the wise ones, if she was not likely to be squarely in the middle. It had been more than difficult when she first went to the tower, learning to do as she was told by others, to bend her neck. After long months when she gave the orders, well, once she'd consulted Elaine, usually, she did not know how she was going to learn to pull wool and scratch gravel all over again. The common room, with its ill-patched plaster ceiling and cold stone fireplaces near collapsing, was the same beehive it had been when she first entered. No one gave her more than a glance now, and she gave them less. A small crowd awaited her and Elaine. Tom and Julian, on a rough bench against the flaking plaster wall, had their heads together with Uno, who was squatting in front of them, long sword hilt rising over his shoulder. Arena and Nicola, both staring amazed at everything and trying not to show it, occupied another bench with Marigan, who was watching Brigitte attempt to amuse Jarl and Sieve by awkwardly juggling 3 of Tom's colored wooden balls. Kneeling behind the boys, Min was tickling them, whispering in their ears, but they only clung to each other, silently staring with those 2 big eyes. Only 2 others in the entire room were not scurrying about. 2 of Mirel's 3 warders happened to be leaning against the wall in conversation a few paces beyond the benches, just this side of the door back to the kitchen corridor. Croy Macon, a yellow-haired young splinter of stone from Andor with a fine profile, and Avar Hachami, hawk-nosed and square-chinned, and a thick, gray-streaked mustache like down-curved horns. No one would call Hachami handsome even before his dark-eyed stare made them swallow. They were not looking at Uno or Tom or anyone else, of course. It was only happenstance that they alone had nothing to do and had chosen just that spot to do it. Of course. Brigitte dropped one of the balls when she saw Nynaeve and Elaine. "What did you tell them?" she asked quietly, barely glancing at the silver arrow in Elaine's hand. The quiver hung at her back, but her bow was propped against the wall. Moving closer, Nynaeve carefully did not look toward Macon and Hachami. Just as carefully, she lowered her voice and was sparing with emphasis. "We told them everything they asked for." Elaine touched Brigitte's arm. "They know you are a good friend who has helped us. You are welcome to stay here, just the same as Arena and Nicola and Marigan." Only when some of Brigitte's tension melted did Nynaeve realize how much had been there. The blue-eyed woman scooped up the fallen yellow ball and smoothly tossed all 3 back to Tom, who snagged them with one hand and made them vanish in a single motion. She wore the faintest of relieved grins. "I can't tell you how glad I am to see the pair of you," Min said for at least the 4th or 5th time. Her hair was longer than it had been, though still a dark band around her head, and she looked different in some other way that Nynaeve could not put a finger on. Surprisingly, freshly embroidered flowers climbed the lapels of her coat. She'd always worn quite plain clothes before. "A friendly face is rare around here." Her eyes flickered just a fraction toward the 2 warders. "We have to settle down alone and have a long talk. I can't wait to hear what you've been up to since you left Tar Valon." Or to tell what she had been up to as well. else Nynaeve missed her guess. "I would like very much to talk to you, too," Elaine said, quite seriously. Min looked at her, then sighed and nodded, not as eager as a moment before. Tom and Julian and Uno came up behind Brigitte and Min, their faces set in that way men took on when they meant to say things they thought a woman might not like to hear. Before they could open their mouths, though, a curly-haired woman in an accepted's dress pushed between Julian and Uno, glowering at them, and planted herself in front of Nynaeve. Faelaine's dress, with its 7 bands of color at the hem for the Ajahs, was not quite as white as it should have been, and her dark face wore a scowl. "I'm surprised to see you here, Wilder. I thought you'd gone running back to your village, and our fine daughter heir to her mother." "Are you still souring milk for a hobby, Faelaine?" Elaine asked. Nynaeve kept her face pleasant. Just barely. Twice in the tower, Faelaine had been set to teach her something. To put her in her place was her own opinion. Even when teacher and pupil were both accepted, the teacher had the status of Aes Sedai so long as the lesson lasted, and Faelaine took full advantage. The curly-haired woman had spent 8 years as a novice, and 5 more as accepted. She was not best pleased that Nynaeve had never had to be a novice at all, or that Elaine had worn pure white for less than a year. 2 lessons from Faelaine and 2 trips to Shiriam's study for Nynaeve, for stubbornness, temper, a list as long as her arm. She made her voice light. "I heard Swan and Lyanna have been badly treated by someone. I think Shiriam means to make an example to end it once and for all." She kept her eyes steady on the other woman's, and Faelaine's widened in alarm. "I've done nothing since Shiriam—" Faelaine's mouth snapped shut, and her face colored heavily. Min hid her mouth behind her hand, and Faelaine jerked her head around, studying the other women, from Brigitte to Marigan. She motioned brusquely to Nicola and Arena. "You 2 will do, I suppose. Come with me. Now. No dawdling." They rose slowly, Arena staring warily, and Nicola with fingers fretting at the waist of her dress. Elaine stepped between them and Faelaine before Nynaeve could, chin high and eyes imperious blue ice. "What do you want with them?" "I am obeying Shiriam Sedai's orders," Faelaine replied. "I myself think they are too old for first testing, but I obey orders. A sister accompanies Lord Bryn's recruiting parties, testing women even as old as Nynaeve." Her sudden smile could have come from a viper. "Shall I inform Shiriam Sedai that you disapprove, Elaine? Shall I tell her you won't let your retainers be tested?" Elaine's chin came down somewhat during that, but of course she could not simply back down. She needed a diversion. Nynaeve touched Faelaine's shoulder. "Have they found many?" In spite of herself, the woman's head turned, and when she glanced back, Elaine was soothing Arena and Nicola, explaining that they would not be hurt or forced into anything. Nynaeve would not have gone so far. When Aes Sedai found someone with the spark born in her, like Elaine or Egwene, someone who would channel eventually, whether she wanted to or not, they were quite open about bundling her into training, whatever her wishes. They seemed more lenient about those who could be trained, but would never touch saidar without it, and about Wilders, those who had survived the 1 in 4 chance of teaching themselves, usually without knowing what they had done, and often blocked in some way, as Nynaeve was. Supposedly they could choose to come or stay. Nynaeve had chosen to enter the tower, but she suspected that if she had not, she still would have gone, perhaps even tied hand and foot. Aes Sedai gave women who had the smallest chance of joining them as much choice as a lamb on a feast day. 3, Faelaine said after a moment. All that effort, and they found 3. 1 a Wilder. She truly did not like Wilders. "I do not know why they are so eager to find new novices. The novices we have can't be raised accepted until we regain the tower. It is all Swan's son's fault, her and Lyanna." A muscle in her cheek twitched, as if she realized that remark might be thought to harass the former Amelin and keeper, and she seized Irena and Nicola each by an arm. Come along. I obey orders, and if you're to be tested, you'll be tested. Waste of time or no waste of time. A nasty woman, Min murmured, squinting after Faelaine as she hurried the others across the common room. You'd think if there was any justice, she would have an unpleasant future ahead of her. Nynaeve wanted to ask what Min had seen in her viewing of the curly-haired accepted. There were 100 questions she wanted to ask, but Tom and the other two men planted themselves firmly in front of her and Elaine, Juilin and Uno to either side, so among the three they could see in every direction. Brigitta was leading Jarl and Steve to their mother, keeping her out of it. Min knew what the men were up to, too, by the rueful look she gave them. She seemed about to say something, but in the end she only shrugged and joined Brigitta. By Tom's face, he could have been about to comment on the weather, or ask what was for supper. Nothing important. This place is full of dangerous fools and dreamers. They think they can depose Elida. That's why Gareth Bryn is here, to raise an army for them. Julian's grin almost split his dark face in two. Not fools, mad women and madmen. I don't care if Elida was there the day Loghain was born. They're mad to think they can pull down an Amelin sitting in the White Tower from here. Cairhien in a month. Rhaegar and the others already have horses marked out for borrowing. Uno was grinning too. It looked incredibly incongruous with that red eye on his patch. The guards are set to watch for people coming in.
Clean this real quick again.
We can lose them in the forest. It'll be dark. The winds dotting their great silver wings back by the river had had a remarkable effect on his language, though he did seem to make up for it when he thought they could not fly. Nynaeve looked at Elaine, who shook her head slightly. Elaine would put up with anything to be Aes Sedai. And he said, small chance that they would influence these Aes Sedai to support Rand if they had decided to try controlling him instead. Make that no chance. She might as well do worse. And yet there was healing. She would learn nothing of it in Cairhien, but here, not 10 paces from her, Thurva Marisis, a slender yellow with a long nose, was methodically ticking off points on a parchment with her pen. A bald-headed warder with a black beard stood conferring with Nisao Dachen near the door, head and shoulders above her despite being no taller than average, while Dagdara Finch, as wide as any man in the room and taller than most, addressed a group of novices in front of one Aes Sedai. Just watch him go mad. If she could progress with healing, maybe she could find a way to hold that madness off. There was too much that Aes Sedai were willing to call hopeless and let go at that to suit her. All of that flashed through her head in the time it took to look at Elaine and turn back to the men. We will be staying here. Uno, if you and the others want to go to Rand, you are free to, as far as I'm concerned. I fear I no longer have money to help you. The gold the Aes Sedai had taken was needed, just as they said, but she could not help wincing at the few silvers left in her purse. These men had followed her, and Elaine, of course, for all the wrong reasons, but that did not lessen her responsibility for them. Their loyalties were to Rand. They had no reason to enter a struggle for the White Tower. With a gold copper, she added reluctantly, but I do have some things you can sell along the way. You must go too, Tom, Elaine said. And you, Julian. There's no point in remaining. We have no need of you now, but Rand. She tried to press her casket of jewels into Tom's hands, but he refused to take it. The three men exchanged looks in that irritating way they had, Uno going so far as to roll his eye. Nynaeve thought she heard Julian mutter something under his breath about having said they would be stubborn. Perhaps in a few days, Tom said. A few days, Julian agreed. Uno nodded. I could do with a little rest if I'm going to be running from warders halfway to Kyrian. Nynaeve gave them her flattest stare and deliberately tugged her braid. Elaine had her chin as high as it had ever been, her blue eyes haughty enough to chip ice. Tom and the others surely knew the signs by now. Their nonsense was not going to be allowed. If you think you are still following Rand al'Thor's orders to look after us, Elaine began in frosty tones, at the same time that Nynaeve said heatedly, You promised to do as you were told, and I mean to see... Nothing like that, Tom broke in, brushing back a strand of Elaine's hair with a gnarled finger. Nothing at all like. Can't an old man with a limp want a little rest? To tell the truth, Julian said, I am just staying because Tom owes me money. Dice. Do you expect us to steal 20 horses from warders like falling out of bed? Uno growled. He seemed to have forgotten just offering to do exactly that. Elaine stared, at a loss for words, and Nynaeve was having difficulty finding them herself. How far they had fallen. Not so much as a shifted foot in the three of them. The trouble was that she was torn. She had determined to send them away. She had, and not because she didn't want them around, watching her curtsy and scrape right and left. Not at all. Yet with almost nothing in Salidar as she had expected, she had to admit, however reluctantly, that it would be comforting to know she and Elaine had more than Birgitta to depend on. Not that she would take up the offer of escape, of course. That was what it should be called. Not under any circumstances. Their presence would just be comforting. Certainly not that she would let them know that. She would not have to, since they were going whatever they thought. Rand could find use for them, very probably, and they would only get in the way here. Except... The unpainted door opened, and Swan stalked out, followed by Lyanna. They stared at each other coldly before Lyanna sniffed and glided away, startlingly sinuous as she vanished around Croy and Avar into the corridor that led to the kitchens. Nynaeve frowned slightly. In the midst of all that iciness, there had been one instant, a brief flicker she almost missed, with it right in front of her. Swan swung toward her, then abruptly stopped short, her face going blank. Someone else had joined the small gathering. Gareth Bryn, dented breastplate buckled over his plain buff-colored coat, and steel-backed gauntlets tucked behind his sword belt,
Let's do one last stab before I call tonight, everyone.
Gray hair and a bluff face gave him the appearance of a man who had seen everything, endured everything, a man who could endure anything. Elaine smiled, nodding graciously. A far cry from her astonished stares, coming into Salidar, when she first recognized him the length of the street. I will not say it is entirely good to see you, Lord. I have heard of some difficulty between Mother and you, but I am sure it can be mended. You know Mother is hasty sometimes. She will come round and ask you back to your proper place in Caemlyn. You may be certain of it. Done is done, Elaine. Ignoring her astonishment, Nynaeve doubted anyone who knew Elaine's rank had ever been so curt to her. He turned to Uno. Have you thought on what I said? Shienarans are the finest heavy cavalry in the world, and I have lads who are just right for proper training. Uno frowned, his one eye turning to Elaine and Nynaeve. Slowly, I'll ask the others. Bryn clapped him on the shoulder. Well enough. And you, Tom Merriman. Tom had held away at the other man's approach, knuckling his mustaches and staring at the floor as if to obscure his face. Now he met Bryn's level stare with one of his own. I once knew a fellow with a name much like yours, Bryn said. A skilled player of a certain game. I once knew a fellow who looked much like you, Bryn replied. He tried hard to put me in chains. I think he'd have cut my head off if he ever laid hands on me. A long time ago, that would be. Men do strange things for women sometimes. Bryn glanced at Swan and shook his head. Will you join me for a game of stones, Master Merriman? I sometimes find myself wishing for a man who knows the game well, the way it's played in lofty circles. Bushy white eyebrows almost as far as Uno's had, but he never took his eyes from Bryn. I might play a game or two, he said.
Right. Let me pause it so we start up again from there tomorrow, like always. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone who keeps stopping by and chilling with me for considering as late as it is. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe.